The snipers in Brawl Stars, or as Supercell usually calls them, the elite guys. God, I can't stand these Brawl translations. Seriously, they're horrible. The snipers in Brawl Stars are those characters who attack from a distance, deal a lot of damage, and almost always at close range, they suffer a lot, since these characters have very little health. In Brawl Stars, we actually have very few snipers, but they are vital for the game, since in game modes where kills matter a lot, snipers are the brawlers you see the most. But then we have the question, which is the best sniper of all? Well, today we'll find out, because today we'll look at snipers in Brawl Stars from the worst to the best. I have to say that yes, we're basing this on what Supercell considers elite shooter brawlers or sniper. We're not going to take into account some brawlers that could be on this list, because they have a lot of range and can do a lot of damage. Yes, but Supercell doesn't classify them as snipers. Also, this video is mostly based on an objective opinion. I mean, it's my opinion. But we're also looking at how good the brawler has been. Historically, I mean, we're not just basing this on the current meta, we're basing it on the entire history of the brawler. Since this way, the brawler could be either really good or really bad, depending on how well they've performed throughout their history. Alright, with that said, let's start with what would be the worst elite shooter or sniper in all of Brawl Stars. Well, to start off this ranking of all 11 snipers in Brawl Stars, definitely the worst of them all would be none other. And well, you might be wondering if this brawler is bad or really terrible. No, but out of all the snipers in the game, this one is definitely the worst. To begin with, Bonnie as a sniper actually struggles quite a lot. More than anything, this brawler should be considered more of a tank than a sniper. Well, it's a brawler that kind of has two forms. In her first form, the tank form, she's a brawler with 10,000 health points. She's the sniper with the most health points in the game. In this form, her basic attack actually does decent damage. But in this form, the truth is she struggles quite a lot compared to other snipers. Well, in this form, this brawler is pretty slow. And yes, it's the form you'll spend the most time in throughout the whole match. This makes it so that this brawler often has a lot of difficulties against assassin brawlers, against tank brawlers, and against thrower brawlers. I mean, in reality, he has a lot of difficulties because in his tank form, he's very slow. And on top of that, he only has one ammo slot. And well, this basic attack isn't gonna get any better. Or it's not going to get any damage upgrade. This makes this brawler's damage very gradual. Now, if we switch to the girl form, which is basically this brawler's super, this actually also has some disadvantages to a certain extent. To begin with, it has a very short range. It's like this brawler just turns into an assassin. Even though it has damage, it's also burst damage. I mean, it's not instant damage, which can also make it struggle against some other brawlers. And well, taking all this into account, this brawler is very dependent on his gadgets. And this brawler only has one useful star power because the second one is trash. This actually makes Bonnie the worst of the snipers. It's not that she's bad or unplayable. She's simply the worst of the snipers. But alright, let's move on to number 10 in this video. In this spot, we have Angelo. A brawler that, well, if snipers are really only going to be used for game modes like Bounty, Knockout, Wipeout, or other modes where getting kills is really important. Well, Angelo doesn't really leave these game modes. This brawler is known for being one of the brawlers that deals the most damage with a basic attack, doing 4,000 points of damage with a single basic attack if it's fully charged. And on top of that, you add the extra damage he can do thanks to his super. This makes a single basic attack from Angelo almost wipe out most brawlers. But anyway, just like with Bonnie and this brawler, it turns out he's a brawler that deals damage very slowly. He's a brawler that needs to fully charge his basic attack to deal damage. And if you don't do that, you'll end up doing very little damage. This means that assassin brawlers can really counter him. Even other brawlers like snipers can counter him as well. They counter him a lot. Because if you don't have the aim to land the first basic attack, you'll almost always end up at a disadvantage in PvP. So yeah, with this brawler, you really need a lot of skill, and it's not for those who use auto-aim. Although, well, this brawler's abilities, his star power, gadgets, and his hypercharged super actually complement him really well, making him a brawler that, yes, he's pretty solid for game modes where skill matters. But other than that, you'll never see him in a mode like Gem Grab or Brawl Ball. So Angelo becomes a sniper. Well, it's not really worth it if you want to have a lot of variety when playing. Because with our next brawler in spot number 9, it's actually the complete opposite. Well, in this spot, we have none other than Maisie, a brawler who, unlike Angelo, even though she's a sniper, isn't used for game modes where skill matters a lot. In fact, as a sniper, this brawler doesn't have such a long range, and this brawler ends up being used for game modes like Brawl Ball, or even at some point it was used in Gem Grab. This brawler actually has pretty enjoyable gameplay. Well, yes, with this brawler, you won't be able to use auto-aim even if the opponent is really close. You'll always have to aim if you want to hit the opponent. Well, this brawler has the peculiarity that his basic attack starts off accelerating very slowly, and as time goes by, it ends up speeding up. It creates a very interesting speed curve. And well, this makes auto-aim always miss, unless the opponent, well, has only 2 brain cells and just stands still. He really has a hard time aiming. But what makes this brawler very useful for game modes that don't rely on skills is that his ultimate covers a pretty large area. It pushes enemies back and deals a lot of damage. Yes, he can chain his ultimate over and over again. And that's thanks to his first gadget and his second star power. This ultimate actually has a lot of advantages and a lot of combos. On top of that, his hypercharge is a hypercharge that deals a lot of damage. And it can also help his ultimate charge up more effectively. This makes this brawler have a lot of synergies to get kill after kill after kill after kill, which is pretty interesting. Well, we could say that this brawler could be the fusion between an assassin and a sniper. But anyway, Maisie stays in 9th place. And we move on to 8th place, with a sniper that's honestly pretty meh. Well, in 8th place is Belle, a brawler that, if you ask me, is really meh. To start, we all know that Belle is a brawler who has the ability to bounce her basic attacks, just like Jessie does. However, these basic attacks stay attached for a longer time. And this makes this brawler really freaking annoying. Because for brawlers that heal their allies like Belle or Poco, Belle is the perfect counter. Also, in 5 versus 5 game modes, if the opponents stay close together, Belle can deal a lot of damage. And this can happen without you even noticing. A lot of times, allies don't even realize they have the basic attack on them. But I'm telling you, this brawler is pretty meh. Because even though their attack isn't that low, let me tell you, the bounce ability is something you rarely get to see, you know? Especially if you're up against people who actually use their brains. The truth is, these people will most likely just move away, and that's it. So your ability really isn't going to be all that useful, to be honest. His gadgets can help his gameplay a little bit, but they're nothing special. One increases the range related to the bounces, and the other gives you a small mine. So it's not a big deal. And as for the star powers, they're not a big deal either. In fact, the second star power is considered a really bad star power. But if we talk about his hypercharge, hypercharge is one of the worst things that has ever existed in the history of Brawl Stars. So yeah, Belle can't really be called good or bad. I mean, it's just kind of whatever. It works, but it's not a big deal, you know? Let's just leave Belle aside and move on to our number 7 spot on this list. In this spot, we have Janet. Yeah, according to Supercell, this brawler is a sniper, honestly. I don't know where they see that she's a sniper, but oh well. That's just life being life and Supercell being Supercell. I feel like Janet is actually a really niche brawler. She's also a brawler that you could rarely get to use, or that she actually has abilities that are really broken. To start with, we have Janet's basic attack. This basic attack is actually pretty annoying since it can reach really long distances, or you can spam it at very short distances, making Janet able to deal a lot of damage. And Janet's gadgets actually help her a lot. One helps her with zoning, another helps her to get away from opponents, and with her star powers. The truth is that the second star power is the only one the brawler really has, because the other one doesn't make much sense, to be honest. Janet actually has a pretty consistent gameplay, if I'm being honest with you. But let's look at Janet's basic mechanics. Her super is actually a pretty unusual super. You know? It's a super that can either be really useful or honestly not useful at all. Janet's flight could be considered an attack where Janet becomes invincible. She throws attacks that can do a lot of damage or very little damage depending on how good you are at controlling her. And it's the same with the hypercharge. Honestly, the hypercharge can be kind of troll and you end up not hitting anything. And even though it has the advantages of making you invulnerable and being able to deal damage, sometimes it ends up being pretty troll. It just doesn't help at all. But this is also very useful, especially in game modes like Gem Grab. If you collect all the gems and fly away, who's going to catch you? So Janet is a real double-edged sword of a brawler. She's a brawler that really depends a lot on how you use her or what the heck you're going to use her for. Honestly, you only get an advantage from her flying ability in Gem Grab, and maybe in some other 5 versus 5 game mode, but other than that, it's really hard to say that Janet is very useful for any other game mode. Let's move on to number 6 in this video. And now we move on to one of the community's favorites. In this spot, we have none other than Mandy, a brawler that when she was released, definitely nobody used. because she was a completely useless brawler. But as time has gone by, actually, Mandy has ended up being in a good spot in the meta. To begin with, Mandy is a brawler that has a lot of range. This makes her quite useful on open maps. But what's definitely the best thing about this brawler? It's none other than Mandy's hypercharge. Even though Mandy's super is an ultra broken attack that can deal a ton of damage and can change super after super after super, the hypercharge is just as good. Well, the hypercharge is like having the super but times 3, making it so that many times you can get a triple kill without even trying. And this can be really useful in many game modes. Believe me, you can never have too many kills. But if we take into account that Mandy is mostly used in game modes like Bounty, Knockout, and Wipeout, actually the hypercharge is ultra mega broken. And well, on top of that, if you use the hypercharge in 5 versus 5 game modes, you're charging it like crazy, you know? Because you just have to hit your super about 2 or 3 times on 4 opponents. And that's it. That makes Mandy become an ultra mega broken brawler and one that's really worth having. Moving on to number 5 on this list, we have a brawler that interestingly, we could consider a bad brawler, or that a lot of people consider a bad brawler, but to the surprise of many, it's actually an extremely good brawler. In 5th place, we have none other than Nani. Many will say that Nani doesn't really deserve such a high spot on this list. But out of all the snipers, Nani is actually a sniper that deals massive damage. The basic attack, it deals 4,800 points of damage. You don't need to charge this brawler. I mean, you don't need to hold down a button. You don't need to wait. You don't need anything. I mean, with the basic attack, you could deal 4,800 points of damage, which is really broken. It has a gadget that returns 80% of the damage dealt to it. I mean, this could also be pretty useful, and it's kind of a troll move. It has a star power that makes her almost invulnerable. And thanks to this, Nani becomes a pretty solid option. But the only disadvantage this brawler has is that walls are its biggest counter. Yeah, like a Mortis main. Well, as we all know, Nani's basic attack splits into 3. So you really need a lot of space for all 3 of Nani's basic shots to not end up. This is almost impossible to do on many maps. But on maps that are completely open and don't have many walls, Nani is a brawler that does pretty well. In fact, on some maps, even in Heist, Nani ends up being really useful because of the damage this brawler does. So yes, Nani is a brawler that's really worth it. And that's why she's in the number 5 spot in this video. Moving on to number 4, we have the hacker's favorite. Yes, of course, in the number 4 spot, we have none other than Belle, a brawler who also deals a lot, and I mean a lot of damage with her basic attack. At first, Belle's basic attack actually doesn't do that much damage, 1,600. But of course, that's only when you hit it once, because when you hit it the second time, you deal almost 4,000 points of damage, which is incredibly high. And you can have this every 2 basic attacks, which is pretty good, since she's not a brawler that struggles much with walls. In fact, you can use this basic attack at short range, and you can really counter tanks. It's actually a pretty interesting case. Well, most of the time elite shots are used on open maps, but Belle could even be used on higher level maps. Also, Belle has 2 gadgets that are excellent. One to deal damage, another to slow down. A super almost gets an instant kill. And if you're not good at landing basic attacks, well, we have a star power that helps you with that. Or we also have a star power that helps a lot with Belle's health. I think maybe the only drawback this brawler could have is the fact that, well, you need to aim well. Because obviously there are people who are terrible at the game or who don't have hacks. And they end up missing all the basic attacks with this brawler. But obviously, with practice and enough skill, you'll end up landing all your shots. And Belle becomes a really good brawler. That's why Belle takes the number 4 spot. But now, for our number 3 spot with the bronze medal, we have the newest sniper in the whole game. And yes, we have the only legendary sniper. In the number 3 spot, we have none other than Pierce, a brawler who has received a huge number of nerfs. But even so, he still ends up being a brawler who is ultra mega strong. This brawler is the only one in the game whose basic attacks don't recharge over time. Instead, you have to pick up the items this brawler drops when he lands his basic attacks, which might sound annoying. Yes, it might sound like something incredibly hard to keep track of, but no. Actually, before you even realize it, this brawler ends up landing a lot of basic attacks. You end up having a lot of these pearls, and you end up doing a lot of damage thanks to them. Because yes, when you have to pick one up, you also throw a small basic attack that does less damage. Of course, but it still does damage anyway, which can add up quite a bit, considering that Pierce's last shot does more damage than usual. This makes it so this brawler can spam the last basic attack, dealing a lot of damage. And on top of all that, add his super. The super helps you get a lot more basic attacks, deal a lot more damage, and basically keep spamming as much as possible. Interestingly, this sniper, he's a sniper you can see in any game mode to a certain extent, and even on close range maps, because you can go PvP against a lot of tanks, hitting them with shot after shot after shot after shot after shot. And well, he actually went on to spam a ton of basic attacks with Pierce, which is insanely annoying. And on top of all that, add his hypercharge, which is also super broken. So yeah, will they end up nerfing Pierce so much in the future that he'll become useless? We don't know. But so far, in the 6 months Pierce has been in the game, he's actually a brawler that's really worth it. And that's why he deserves the top 3 spot in this video. But anyway, throughout the history of Brawl Stars, obviously the number 2 spot was going to be one of the snipers, which you absolutely have to know how to use. In this spot, we're going to talk about none other than Piper. Piper is a brawler that I think every Brawl Stars player should learn to play at some point, since she's the ultimate brawler at long range. Now, she's not the sniper that does the most damage. Yes, that's something to keep in mind. She's also not the sniper with the most health. She's a brawler that really struggles at close range. But, if you use her correctly at long distances, this brawler becomes a killing machine. She basically has a gadget that gives you an instant kill. She has a star power that can help you reload her shots faster. She has a hypercharge that maximizes her damage and pushes enemies away. And it's a hypercharge that charges up with just a few basic attacks. So well, Piper is almost always a brawler that's always there. She's one of the snipers that's most consistently in the meta. The only time she wasn't in the meta was when she was removed from the game. In fact, we already talked about that in a separate video. But other than that, Piper is always a brawler that's worth playing, because she's a brawler that up to a certain point can get you out of a tough spot. But, alright, considering that Piper wasn't in first place, who was actually in first place? Well, this brawler is none other than Brawl. The brawler, we could say, is the best sharpshooter up to a certain point, because this brawler is good for everything. Seriously. This brawler is a brawler that's effective at mid, close, and long range. Since he's a brawler that doesn't suffer from low damage at short range, he has enough health to withstand a PvP up to a certain point. He has the abilities thanks to his gadgets to open up the map, and thanks to his star powers, he can have more basic attacks, or he can have a bigger super. In fact, even though he recently got a rework and they added his buffs. Even without that, Brock is actually a brawler that's almost always worth having too. He's a very easy brawler to get. He's a special brawler. I mean, he's one of those brawlers you almost get when you start the game. And as we already mentioned, this brawler could actually be useful in any game mode. And in many situations, he can be useful in Brawl Ball to open up the map. He can be useful in Bounty, in Wipeout, even in Heist. Because the fire left by his basic attack deals damage to the safe. This makes Brock an extremely versatile brawler, and that's why he's the number 1 sniper. But anyway, do you think there's a better sniper in the game? Let me know in the comments. If you really liked the video, well, I'll leave you my previous ranking in these categories. On the best assassin brawler in Brawl Stars. Plus a playlist with all the videos of this type. See you next time. Bye.